So I made a point to read to my son every night. Just a little bedtime story book. He's 4 now. When I first started out, I was pretty much just reading whatever we got for like gifts, Christmas time. And it's your traditional goodnight gorilla, everybody poops, go to fuck to sleep. Your traditional bedtime stories. And then as he got older, he got interested in superheroes and Star Wars and Curious George. So we started reading those books. The superheroes specifically, we were gifted this, it was a series of books with this little plastic speaker, basically. So you click the book that you're reading and you follow chapter by chapter, and there's a narrator who reads it to you. One of those stories is about Spider-Man. Spider-Man. The Dangers of Doc Ock, I think is what the book was called. And I read this book to him a few times. And there's a page in the book, fairly early on in the book, where you see Spider-Man just, he's in the town square and he's webbing up to somewhere and he's going to go figure out who Doc Ock is. And it wasn't until recently that I noticed that in the background, there's this guy. And he's the only person other than Spider-Man that you see on this page. You can see their face. And he's got this very ornate expression of shock and awe and maybe a little disgust. And he's looking directly at Spider-Man. So the first thing I think is, who's this guy? What's this guy's deal? This is #Flash Fiction. It's a show about writing in real time. And I'm your host, Eric M. Hunter, and I've been writing stories since I was a kid. Now, there's a million ways to start a story, and you never know how it's going to turn out. It could be good, or it could be really bad. Let's see what happens. So I took pictures of the book, obviously, and I'm going to upload those to the podcast in the description so you guys can see like what I'm looking at. And it's interesting. This they kind of just set the scene for the show. So on the left, so the panel happens in on both pages. So on the left page is Spider-Man completely done up, ready to go, and he's webbing upwards. And on the right is the words of the page to continue the story. Below the words, you can clearly see that there's a crosswalk. There's a gentleman in a black suit with a it kind of looks like a briefcase, maybe. Walking across the crosswalk, there's a black car waiting for him to walk. But then if you go over to the left, you see a couple of bodies, guy in a green jacket, guy in a black jacket, and then you see our subject. And this guy, like, I don't know, I want to describe him as like the college bro fraternity guy. But he's probably not. He's probably just like a young 20-something, still trying to find his way in the world. And he is completely astonished at seeing Spider-Man in the middle of like Times Square. I'm a huge Spider-Man fan. Spider-Man was the comic I went to when I wanted to read comics. It was Spider-Man. And then a very distant second was the X-Men, and then pretty much anything that Batman was in. Batman, Robin, all of those cast of characters. Those are the comics that I would read. And one of the reasons I like Spider-Man so much is because he was a kid. He was primarily showcased as just being a kid, either late high school or early college. He was nerdy. He was not athletic. He did not do well with the ladies, and a lot of that I could relate to. But one of the things that Spider-Man and Peter Parker always had was a very positive, upbeat mentality. Like his personality, he was cracking jokes, and he always knew exactly what to say in a particular situation. And this transcribed into what I consider the prefaces when it comes to Spider-Man. And I loved that cartoon. It had everything. It didn't have the traditional theme song. It had my theme song. It was technically grunge. The distortion it was really bad. That's what, when I think of Spider-Man, that's what I think of. I think of that cartoon. That was a huge part of my life growing up, was that cartoon. It's just, so obviously my kid likes similar things that I like because he's subjected to those things. And that's just what happens when you're raising kids. But we're reading this book and I'm looking at this guy and I don't know what it is. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that the artist wanted some sort of reaction to seeing Spider-Man webbing through, Manhattan, which is crazy because in this book, he's fighting Doctor Octavius for the first time. This is the first time he meets Doc Ock. And the scene before that, he mentions taking down some rival gang that's been causing havoc. Like, the gang's named. I can't remember what the name of it is now, but like the gang has a name. They're just not a gang of thugs. He's been around. Spider-Man's been in the news. When Peter Parker goes to the Daily Bugle, J. Jonah Jameson says, "Hey, well, there's some guy down at this lab who's stealing stuff. He's calling himself Doctor Octopus." And Peter Parker's like, "All right, let's go get some pictures." And then he suits up as Spider-Man and then webs off. And that's when this scene happens, is when he webs off. So clearly, he's not just some masked crusader that just happened to appear one day. And then as he's webbing through Times Square, this guy just happens to get a glimpse of him. Nobody else is watching it. Like, nobody else sees this. So that either means that Spider-Man is moving extremely fast enough that most people are just like, "Oh, what was that?" And then, by that time he's gone, so they don't see anything. Or they don't care. That's the story that's interesting to me, is that it's Spider-Man, but nobody cares it's him. Nobody cares that he's there. Nobody sees him as like this, as the superhero, as the savior of them. They don't see that. They don't see him at all. Like, I would be impressed. Like, that would be super interesting to me to see that. And this guy has that feeling. He has the exact same expression that I would have the first time that I saw Spider-Man, and everybody else around him could care less. That's so odd to me. That whole scene is so odd to me. So what could make him look that astonished at seeing Spider-Man? So my first thought is that he's from out of town. He's not a New Yorker. He's a transplant, which I understand. I'm a transplant from a farm town to a neighboring neighborhood of a major city. So I understand being a transplant. Again, nobody else cares around him other than him. So just seeing him, I feel like that wouldn't be enough. All right, so that wouldn't be enough. So what would we do? We could... So the stranger's reaction, who for some reason I want to call Bryce, because Bryce to me is a very, like, rich family, well-to-do blue blood, and now we have a kid, and gosh, Bryce is going to take over the company. Bryce screws everything up. We should send him off to the city so that he can learn to be somebody before he comes back and takes over the family teddy bear stuffing company, I guess. Why not? So Bryce sees this guy, and he has a very odd reaction to him. So one of the things that Spider-Man did is he always had his suit on. Well, okay, again, according to the cartoon, Spider-Man, he always had his suit on underneath his clothes, so that if any kind of danger happened or whatever, he could just, take his shirt off, Superman-esque, and then throw it in a bag somewhere behind a dumpster, and then go web off, and then come back when he's done. Maybe he sees him change. So, like, maybe Peter Parker's in an alley. He's changing into Spider-Man, and this guy just happens to be in that alley and sees him change. So that would give him an idea of who he is. It could be maybe he's too far away to really see his face, but he realizes that he's just a kid. He's just a regular guy like he is. Could be maybe when he sees him change, he sees something strange about him, that he's hiding a secret or something. Like, he's got a gnarly tattoo on his back or something. Or the other thing I'm thinking too is, like, maybe Spider-Man's crazy. Spider-Man sees his dead Uncle Ben everywhere, and Uncle Ben's urging him not to do what he's doing, but he feels like he needs to do it anyway. So maybe he's as he's about to change, he sees the ghost of Ben. Ben's urging him not to do this, and they're having an argument. And as the argument's going on, this guy is watching him do it. He's watching him have this argument. So he's essentially just talking to himself like a crazed lunatic. Maybe that's what it is. Okay, so he knows who Spider-Man is. He knows he's this huge icon. He's this huge, defender of peace, the fighter of crime. And you come to find out he's batshit crazy. And it's like we're putting our life and our future in the hands of this crazy guy who's seeing ghosts and talking to himself. That's kind of funny. How would I write that? Because we have either we either have the perception. All right, so we have 3 possible points of view when it comes to writing this piece. Since I feel like we're focusing on the dude in the background, he should be the focal point of this flash fiction. So do we do a first-person point of view from Bryce, and he finds himself in this back alley for whatever reason, and he sees Spider-Man changing and talking to himself, essentially. But see, he wouldn't see Uncle Ben there, because obviously Uncle Ben's in Peter Parker's head. So he would literally just be talking to himself. Could make it really weird. How crazy can we make Spider-Man? That's what I'm thinking. Like, how mentally unhealthy can we make this guy? Like, because we can have him see ghosts and talk to ghosts. Maybe we can even have him, like, what's the word? Like, do a little bit of punishment or something. Like, he beats himself for the mistake that he's making. Like, maybe he doesn't like being Spider-Man.
Nice outfit. Don't tell me. You're a Leo, right?
But then again, that part doesn't really come off in the book. Of course he likes being Spider-Man, except for when it's bad for him and he becomes Man-Spider or something. Then it's never a good idea to be Spider-Man. I do like the idea of him talking to Uncle Ben. I think that's neat. I mean, you can make it so that he's like crazy violent. Like he's got mood swings. He's got crazy mood swings. So, okay, that could be it. All right, so how do we get him to the alley? Okay, here we go. So he's kind of in plain clothes. He's not wearing like a uniform or a suit or anything. So maybe he's like a pizza delivery guy. They're playing a prank on him, basically for him to take out the trash. And then when he goes out the back door to dump the trash, the door's locked. And then he's got to walk all the way around. That puts him outside. I think that's a good start. Because that builds, so that takes the character of Bryce, and it shows that he's kind of a pushover. There you go. Okay. So maybe we make Bryce look just like Peter Parker. He's kind of a dork. He's a pushover. He doesn't like confrontation. He's very gullible. When we, as the reader, when he sees Spider-Man, he's overwhelmed with joy because he wants to be Spider-Man. Because to him, Spider-Man is this all-powerful being who takes control of situations, and he has all the right tools, and he's, mysterious, and men want to be him. But he realizes that he's absolutely crazy, which makes him second-guess who his heroes are. That kind of tells an interesting story. But can we do it under 500 words?
Sorry, Charlie. Spider-Man! But you're a little late for Halloween.
All right, so let's get our intro. Let's introduce Bryce and put him in the alley. One thing I forgot to do was set the font type. I'm very a Courier New 12-point double-spaced kind of guy. So I just gave one of these guys a toothpick, giving a villain a toothpick and then using it more than just to clean his teeth. Like he's using the toothpick to make a point, which just makes him even more of an asshole, because it's like when you give somebody in your story like an apple to eat while they're saying evil shit. You're like signaling the reader that this guy's the bad guy. He's eating an apple. Book bag, backpack, book bag, backpack, book bag, backpack, book bag, backpack. Two words that are identical, but they are just different words. So we established that he's kind of a pushover, that he's a sort of like Peter Parker, and that he looks up to Spider-Man because he's the opposite of that. Only we're going to make Peter Parker crazy. I don't want to get too kinky with it, but you never know. You never know. Spider-Man could be kinky. He could put that mask on, and suddenly he's into things that Peter Parker wouldn't think about. Every time is 2 words. 1 word, 2 words. What do you say, Google? 1 word, 2 word? Yep, 2 words. Every time. 2 words.
Name's Hobgoblin, and you're right on time for your funeral.
Spider-Man's a white guy? Flowing brown hair and white skin. Pale skin. That's probably what I should have said. That's funny. Spider-Man's a white guy? Billy-dilly-doo. That's kind of like a quick first draft. I don't know. Like, it's okay. Like, I don't hate it. I feel like I'm trying to make Spider-Man more crazy than he is, obviously, which, I don't know all the lore of Spider-Man, but I'm pretty sure they make him out to be a fairly level-headed guy for the most part. So if we have him talking to ghosts and admitting to murder, oh, by the way, he's admitting to murder. Is that enough to make somebody who admires this guy second guess his role models? Because that's what I'm going for. Like, I'm going for like that we all have. We all have, holes. None of us are actually superhuman. We all have problems. Even the most super of us make mistakes. And if we make out Spider-Man to be a psychopath, I think that would give Bryce pause to having looking up to Spider-Man. I don't know if we do that here just yet. But I mean, Spider-Man admitting to murder, that's something. It leaves the reader something to think about because it ends so abruptly, which most flash fiction does. You never want to try to tell something bigger than it is, because usually in flash fiction, like I said before, you've only got about 1,000 words. Every word counts, and you don't have time to kind of tend the meadows and hope that something kind of sprouts up from your gardening. We're in and out. You want to come in late and leave early is kind of the idea. And you want to make it interesting enough that obviously the reader reads it. And while they're reading it, they're kind of making up their own judgments in their head as to what's happening and what's going on. And like when it finally ends, because it ends so quickly, they should be left with questions. They should be left with, oh, what happens to this character? Like, how would I feel if I was in that position and that kind of thing. So I feel like we've kind of done that. Let's see. Where are we at word count wise? We're at 1,000 words. Oof. Okay. I got to cut this in half. Oh, no. Okay. So, all right. I just got to start cutting this. All right. So let me just read it and see what it sounds like before I start my line editing. So that's another thing that I always run into. It's like when I write a first draft, or this is what I call a zero draft, because I'm literally just writing it and I know I'm going to have to go back and fix it. I am constantly like, okay, I just need to read this for context to see what it sounds like, to see if it makes sense. Do we have our pluses and minuses? Do we have our issues? Are we fixing our issues? And I'm always wanting just to start editing and like, no, this word doesn't make sense. And this, but I feel like that's what I kind of have to do with this one. Like, I feel like I have to just start editing it because I'm at 1,000 words. And I'm going to have to get it down to 500 at most. So I'm going to do something I don't normally do, which is a line edit / read through. This stuff is always easy for me to cut. So I have the lines. So Brent squinted his eyes to make out his face through a mess of brown hair and pale skin. He thought quickly of his next moves. Would he find the courage to stand up and call for his attention? Or would he cower behind the smelly, rat-infested dumpster until he was clearly out of sight? Until he was clearly out of sight. Or, until he was gone. Done. I just saved 4 words right there. Turn it into 1.
Thanks for showing me the view, but I'm afraid of heights.
All right, so after a bit of editing, it wasn't too bad. A lot of the lines that I cut were basically just me trying to fill out the scene. Again, this is flash fiction, so you don't need to know how nasty the garbage smelled. You don't need to know that there's flies flying over the dumpster. Like, that's a lot of that stuff is implied, so most of that stuff's pretty easy to cut. I also do a lot of just added words for no reason, just because in my head it sounds good. From like a written perspective, it makes me sound smart, which in the end it just adds to my word count and is just fluff. Like, it doesn't, the words don't do anything. So a lot of that stuff is easily cut. I don't know though. I'm curious as to where my word count's at. 831. I mean, I know I said I wanted to be under 500. I just don't know if I can be under 5. I don't know if I could do that with this. I mean, I'm sure I can. I'm sure I can just... I like how it flows, though. Like, I think it flows very well. What do I do? All right, I'm going to read through it again and see if maybe there is something that I can cut out and kind of shrink it down.
Is this guy a pro wrestler? Oh, that would explain the tights.
So, I don't know. Like, I'm liking the story more and more the more I edit it and the more I reread it. It has its flaws. It's not 728, so I was able to drop it down an extra 100 words. I mean, can I get it under 500? I'm sure I can, but I feel like I'm going to lose something. Now I'm starting to wonder that if this story is just too big for flash fiction. Like, it's just... There's too much going on. I mean, I've got 3 characters, which is already too many. Almost too many. I don't know. Like, I wrote what I wanted to write. Gave a reason for this guy to have that reaction when nobody else seemed to care. In the picture, anyway. I think I did. I kind of turned it into like a creepy story more than just... I mean, yeah, you know, Spider-Man being crazy and talking to his dead uncle is one thing. But, like, there's a part where he's, like, kind of, like, creeping down on him as he's looking around for whatever made the sound of the rat being moved around. And that kind of brings kind of like a thriller horror aspect to it, which again is very interesting to me. Like, that's very cool. I always enjoyed stuff like that. Like, I was telling a buddy of mine about Burn Bright, which is basically just what if Superman, when he was a kid coming down to Earth, was evil and did a bunch of evil shit and killed people. That's really interesting to me. And turning Spider-Man and kind of a weird creep is also interesting to me. I like this. I think this story's good. Okay. So I'm just going to call this one Spider-Man. So here is Spider-Man. Bryce stared down at the 2 bags of trash. Come on. What if I get shit all over me? You know what they could do to my tips? Julian, the oldest, fattest cook, who hasn't realized that you can't retire from a pizza shop, poked his toothpick at him. Nah, I already did my share. It's your turn. Bryce sighed, picked up both trash bags, and made his way to the back of Ronnie's Pizza. He pushed the back door open and walked out into the alley. The door closed with a heavy thunk. The dumpster was already covered with flies and what smelled like either last night's Parmesan cheese or a dead body. With all of his might, Bryce hoisted both bags over his head. Satisfied, he walked back to the door and turned the knob. It was locked. He pounded on the door, but only the echoes of his knocks and the quiet laughter of Julian rang back. "You asshole!" he shouted. Bryce was starting to think that being pranked and pushed around was part of his personality. Defeated, Bryce turned and began his long walk around the back side of the business district and thought of the city's poor layout. Off in the distance was another poor soul, who was also locked outside. The stranger dropped his book bag to the ground, ripped it open, and pulled out a mask. It was edged in blue and red, 2 giant eyes, and laden with a black grid. Bryce knew right away. Spider-Man. Bryce ducked behind the Korean barbecue's dumpster. Oh shit, he thought. Bryce wondered what his first meeting with his hero would be like. He thought he'd be standing in line at a convention center with the rest of Queens for a picture and an autograph. No one would believe that he'd meet him hiding behind a dumpster. He shifted from behind the dumpster and watched the stranger unbutton his pants, pushing them down to reveal bright blue and red tights. He flung his t-shirt over his head to a long shirt with an embossed spider logo. Bryce squinted his eyes to make out his face through a mess of brown hair and pale skin. Would he find the courage to stand up and call for his attention, or cower behind the smelly, rat-infested dumpster until he left? He was interrupted by a faint voice coming from Spider-Man's direction. "Yes, I know, Uncle Ben," Spider-Man said, pulling the last of his ensemble, the mask, over his head, covering his face. "Because I have to, that's why," he shouted. Suddenly aware of his volume, Spider-Man looked to see if he had gained any attention before continuing. "Great responsibility, remember?" he whispered loud enough for Bryce to overhear. He took a step back and stretched his arms out in agitated confusion. "That's not what you meant? What the hell does that mean?" he asked. Spider-Man's tone grew harsh. It sent a chill down Bryce's spine. The rustling sent a nervous rat from the dumpster that darted across the alley and into a nearby exhaust vent. Silence. Rocks crunched underneath the feet that grew louder as they headed in Bryce's direction. He held his breath. A flock of birds called from the rooftop. Bryce dared to look again and saw Spider-Man no more than 10 feet away from him, staring up at the sky. He continued to speak to no one. "Because I have a duty now, Uncle Ben. I was given this gift to protect New York City. This is my great responsibility." He waited for a rebuttal. "Your opinion doesn't matter anymore. It's too late. They're dead. I killed them. I killed them. Not since..." Police sirens made their approach onto Main Street and then tore down Mary Place. Bryce watched Spider-Man snap his head in that direction, then took off down the alley towards it. Bryce forced himself off the ground and broke out into a sprint to chase him. When Bryce came to the intersection, he watched as Spider-Man shot a web from his wrist and pulled himself into a swing. The same motion he'd seen 1,000 times on TV. No one else seemed to notice the superhero's escape into the sky. Bryce decided then that he would need a new role model. That is so interesting to me. Like, that is such a cool story to me that I would love to have read. And I just did. So, let me know what you think. You can hit me up on Twitter at FlashFiction4. I'm always looking for your stories, so send them on over to me. You can either tag me on Twitter, or you can send them to hello@ericmhunter.net. And until next time.